Hi Liam, so this is my presentation for my 3D modeling. Um, Here I have my screenshot of my render right now. So I have the main character, which is the uh, protagonist, and then there's some other assets. These are my skin texturing examples. So I've used Substance Painter, and here is my focus on topology. So throughout the semester, what I've done is I've followed a series of tutorials by Flip Normals, and they were mainly focusing on character topology for a rig ready asset. So I've highlighted here some of the flows of geometry that are important, and I've got here as well just some other details. So essentially, I did a high poly sculpt with something like 6 million triangles and really fine skin detail. And then what I've done is I've then baked that into, created a low poly mesh in Maya. So this is my second one. My first one that I submitted with the first assignment was very different. It didn't have a lot of the loops that I needed to have, and it didn't have the same. It just wasn't the same quality. This I've really honed in and learnt this new skill. Um, but yeah, essentially, then baking the details in with Substance Painter from the high poly mesh to be able to use them in my texturing workflow. So these are my UVs. I think they're pretty decent. I've made sure to use up as much space as possible and keep things flowing nicely. So as you can see, I've put a little screenshot of with the UV checker on, and it all flows really well. Here is my clothing for my character. So here I've maintained sort of similar workflows and lots of things that I've learned on how to flow geometry and how to like this loop here and sort of how I've split this. I've really just learned how to, turn one edge into two and, how to, uh, sorry, I'm not making any sense. But these are my shorts. So these are the UV maps. And then in order, I have metalness, roughness, the bump normal map, the height, and the base color. I've used sort of a cartoony stylization, and I've hand painted in Photoshop and in Substance Painter. And then what I've done is I've passed it through an image to image workflow. And what I've done is then I've gotten this anime sort of stylization. Instead of just using that as my new base mesh, what I've done is I've passed it back through Substance Painter and I've added more detail. And so in the end, I've got this sort of cartoony, sort of realistic, which is to do with my aesthetic style and my vision for my project overall. I think it really works well, as well as sort of integrating AI to create this stylization really made my workflow a bit faster uh, and I think better. The topology, this is the topology in UV of the sandals or the slides. So I've got no engons. I've really honed in on, um, I changed the vertex angle. So what we've got here is we've got really smooth vertexes here and then sharp on the edges where there needs to be. I was having some shader issues with the normals when I was just sort of using them as they were. So what I did is uh, I focused on that and I learned that as a new skill to be able to get the final outcome of the model that I wanted. As well, here are the UVs. You can't see it, but essentially what I did was I went into Photoshop and I made these different colors, and then in Substance Painter you can select them as different colors for different effects. And so then I've hand painted and used some of the presets as well in this. What I've done is I've passed it through an image to image AI, and then I've gotten some of these like blood splattering effects and some of these interesting textures that almost look animated as well, like it's come from a manga. And then I've then repassed it through Substance Painter to be able to not use it entirely, but just have a little bit of that feel. Um, and so here we have the normal, the base color, the height, metallic, and roughness of my sandals. Here we have the teddy. So this was a pretty much a speed sculpt that I did. the other day. Essentially, I sculpted out the teddy and then I retopologized him. And I've made sure to keep the same topology, the things that I've learned through my character topology study in mind for this asset and for like around the elbows to make sure that and the knees to make sure there's a little bit of extra geometry for some bending, as well as the eyes. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to be, how I was going to be animating them, so I sort of set it up anyways like this, but I've sort of changed, so that's not really necessary. But yeah, a lot of just the flowing geometry that I've learned. Here's the UV map for the teddy, packed nicely. And here is the texturing once again. So this is Substance Painter and then Photoshop. Originally, I had this all to do with the Substance Painter texture, but I found that the normal map and the height map contributed to the feel of the sort of knitted texture enough that I could really just paint over with solid colors. And so I passed it back into Photoshop for these sort of accents, as well as the little shape here on the stomach of the teddy bear. That was actually made in Stable Diffusion as well. So I'm really like integrating AI into my workflow for rapid prototyping and for using, not for entirety, I use it as a collaging. And so instead of using photos from online for my texturing workflow that may be copyrighted, like getting photos of grime or dust or little things like this, I can AI generate them instead and add these details. So here we have sculpting experiments. So this is the strawberry. This was a 2-hour sculpt from concept to sculpt for my character. Felt like my scene wasn't fleshed out enough, so I did this. I did this the other night, and then I've gone into Maya, and what I've done is I've extruded along the curves. So that was another new tool, which I'm sure I'll use again for wiring and things like that. But these are still high poly meshes straight from ZBrush. I did retopologize them, but then I was having some issues where I think I had a misstep along the way. I had some faces that were taking up the same screen space, and then Maya crashed, and it was like 2 in the morning, and I hadn't saved, but I'll redo it. I think I learned my lesson there. This is the result from the speed sculpt, and this is the mid sculpt. And this is sort of my workflow with Stable Diffusion, taking inspiration, putting in my concept ideas, and then ZBrush, and then using it again to be able to refine sort of my design style mid ZBrush sculpt, and then during and then the final asset there. So my skills that I've acquired are that I've learned ZBrush a lot. I started this year with having very little experience. I hadn't used it at all, really, and certainly not for a whole character or for these sorts of assets that I'm doing now. I studied topology and completed a paid series of tutorials going through the principles and key steps for a rig-ready and performant mesh. So I'm going to be using these in a Unity project, and so performance is key. I know that some of my textures are quite high detail, but I can lower the UDIMs for per use case basis for how performant the scene is or how performant the user's computer is. So there's no n-gons, and there's only 2 triangles on any of my meshes, and that is on the main character's feet. And that was a sort of problem area, and that was recommended in the tutorial I was sort of following along. But I'm sure I could figure that out, but might just take a little bit more time. But I think I'm going to leave it. It should be okay. It's in a place with little movement, a new workflow. So yeah, modeling basic form in Maya. I found that helpful for instead of trying to do it in ZBrush, I find it easier to just model it. If it's complicated like hands or feet and things like that, then ZBrush, then Maya for retopology, then ZBrush for reprojecting the detail, and then Substance Painter for baking the high poly mesh into the low poly mesh, and then texturing, and then Photoshop and back into Maya for rendering. So from my feedback from my original assignment, from assignment 1, you said that I wasn't very clear on my stylization and influences. So here I have my inspirations. So I'm wanting this grimy, cute, disgusting but wholesome aesthetic. These cartoony feelings, organic textures, high level of detail, and this sort of this feeling is what I'm going for. Gorillas really captures it well, I think. And the plot is attached to a world where AI has morphed with nature, and the protagonist lives in a toxic wasteland where uh, yeah, sorry, that sentence wasn't finished. The disturbing cute creatures, these are um, AI chatbots in the story, and that's why sort of the organic and the technology have merged into one, and the world is a hive mind AI. And so these are sort of like agents of the hive mind AI. Hence why I have the strawberry with teeth. If I go all the way back to here, and the teddy bear, because they're going to be like, no, please don't kill me, and you have to eat them. But for my timeline, until the 18th of May, I will sculpt additional areas of the scene. I found that I brought the whole scene as one into ZBrush, and then I started like looking at it and playing with the form. I found that really helpful for the overall scene construction, and I think I'm going to use that in my workflow. So to have everything on different viewing layers, and then to be able to sculpt it all in the one scene and then re-export it. I think that's going to be useful. I need to do some set design structures, rubbish, grass, etc. Then from the 18th to the 25th, I will retopologize, UV unwrap, and texture my ZBrush sculpts. And then from the 25th to the 8th of June, I'll build custom rigs and create a simple animation loop for the sequence. So what I'm thinking is he's going to grab something, and then one of the other AIs will react. But I'm not too sure right now. I'm looking forward to creating a complex face rig for the main character and have began my process within Maya, but I haven't got a screenshot here, but I think I'm over time.